much for joining us for this very timely topic, and welcome to Power Speaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of Power Speaking Incorporated. After today's event, you can access this and past episodes on the Power Speaking podcast, and our producer, Andrew, will drop a link for you in chat for your easy access. In honor of Women's Histories Month, we are going to be discussing best practice communication strategies women in STEM can use to ensure their voices are heard, their messages are clear, and their impact is strong. And the reason that we're zeroing in on the STEM sector in particular, as I'm sure many of you in the audience know, the disparity gap continues to be much more significant in these professions than in other industries. For instance, in healthcare, women are overrepresented. In STEM, however, women are less likely than men to enter the professions in the first place. They're much more likely to leave. And despite earning the same high quality education, women on average tend to start their careers at a lower level. Now, naturally, there are a number of underlying issues contributing to these disparities, some of which are systemic in nature and not within our immediate control. One tool, though, that you all have at your disposal are your communication skills. Applying best practice communication strategies can help you secure a job in STEM and thrive once you arrive. And joining us today, we have 4 very distinguished women who have all sorts of advice and stories that they're eager to share. First up, we have Nima Uttappa. Nima is head of engineering, data analytics, and AI for McKinsey & Company. And Nima's entire career and expertise has been centered around helping to transform companies through advanced technology. It's a pleasure having you, Nima.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone.
Also joining us today is Eleanor. Eleanor Deal is tech lead of digital publishing at the Office for National Statistics in the UK. Being from a non-traditional tech background and a woman in STEM, Eleanor is an outspoken advocate for diversity and inclusivity in teams. Welcome, Eleanor.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here.
Also joining us is Sarah Palmer. Sarah Palmer is one of Power Speaking's master facilitators and coaches. She also has helped countless women in STEM and other professions to up their game through enhanced communication skills. It's a pleasure to have you, Sarah.
Thanks, Carrie.
And last but not least, we have Karen McDonough Reynolds, Transformation Director and board member of London Market Ventures. One of Karen's key passions is working toward true equity in both the technology and insurance markets. Thank you for joining us, Karen.
Thank you. Hi to everyone.
All right, let's get into it. Now, we all know that women still face the glass ceiling and discrimination in the workplace. Why is it, though, Karen, that these disparities are even more pronounced in STEM professions?
I think there's a couple of things that come into play here. I think one of the things is the lack of real visible role models. I'm a true believer in you are what you see. And I think that actually discourages more people coming into our industries because they don't see the women who are out there. I also think that's quite unique about STEM is, and especially I come from the more technology element, but you've actually got quite a lot of people with very low EQ. And again, they don't necessarily pick up on a lot of the body language, the problems and stuff. So I think it makes it less of an environment where a lot of women would want to work. And also, I think there is this geek image, this stereotyping of the type of woman who works in STEM. And again, we need to sort of move on from those, probably from the 70s or the 80s, these stereotypes. And lastly, I think for all of our male colleagues out there, we need better allies. They need to be helping and encouraging people to come and work in our industries and to really see that the amazing careers, and what I personally have always been in STEM, but the amazing careers that are on offer to women, so that they can see that there is actually a future and a really great career in technology.
Excellent. All really important points. And Eleanor, I'd love if you could elaborate on this a little bit. Working at the Office of National Statistics, you obviously have a lot of data at your disposal. Can you share a few statistics with us that help to highlight the challenges?
I think the big one that kind of encapsulates a lot of this is a statistic I found in the Confidence Gap, which is an article on The Atlantic, but it basically says that women underestimate themselves on average by 10%. There's a measurable phenomenon where we're underestimating, undervaluing, and underselling ourselves, and particularly in an industry that is then seen as, male dominated, and that is associated with what are traditionally masculine constructs. It's easy for people to underestimate us, and then we're underestimating ourselves. So we're potentially making that gap wider, albeit unconsciously. I think one of the things that I've found really helpful is to try and be aware of that bias and now go, okay, I need to keep better track of all the things I'm doing. I need to look at the ways I can kind of promote myself, look at the ways I can improve my own confidence in that way as well. So it really helps to be aware of exactly the statistics around these biases. I think there's another one that's quite interesting as well, is this idea that men will apply for a job ad when they meet 60% of the criteria, and women on average will only apply for an ad where we meet 95% plus of the criteria. So it's things like that where the industry isn't targeted to invite us in. And being aware of that, we can help kind of push back against some of those challenges.
Thank you. That's so insightful. So if you think about it, if we add this fact that women have a tendency to underestimate themselves, and they're looking at an industry that has such few role models, making it feel less accessible, that those complexities make it pretty clear why we have this gap. And I so appreciate you highlighting that. There's an excellent book. It's called The Confidence Code, The Science and Art of Self-Assurance, What Women Should Know, by Katie Kay and Claire Shipman. And I would just love to share one quote from these authors, which I find really, really optimistic. Almost daily, new evidence emerges of just how much our brains can change over the course of our lives. In response to shifting thought patterns and behavior, if we keep at it, if we channel our talent for hard work, we can make our brains more confidence prone. What the neuroscientists call plasticity, we call hope. So it's about that mind shift, about that awareness, like you say, Eleanor, and being very conscious of all of the wins and all of the positive things to help shift that mindset and boost your confidence in the way in which you project it. So let's transition to some how-to advice, and let's talk about it in just two broad categories. One is with relation to how you go about securing a job within the STEM profession in the first place, and then what techniques can you use to help ensure you thrive once you do so. So Nima, let's start with you. What sorts of challenges, and you've succeeded in not only thriving within the STEM industry, but advancing to very senior level positions. I'd love to hear from you in terms of some of the challenges you've faced in securing jobs and any advice you have for overcoming them.
Thank you, Kerry. I kind of second what Eleanor just said, underestimating yourself. I think when I first started, that's what I did, especially when I moved over to US, for a career in tech. So the reason I say that is when you are interviewed for any position, like I think women to an extent are lowballed. The reason I say that, and I can give you some of the examples, like even at this level, like before I took on this job, there was a request from one of a very large companies for an executive director position. And so I asked them, like, who does this executive director report to? Like, I was then reporting to CTO, CIO. So, and they said the role reports to another executive director. And that kind of didn't make sense to me. And I'm like, okay, who does that executive director report to? And they said it was the CIO. So I said, if these two equivalent people should be ideally reporting to CIO, but then they said, no, you will be tested and tried for 3 months, and only then can you go and report to CIO. Second example, so they, again, very reputed company, like I think Fortune 10 or 15 or 20 in the top numbers at least, says, okay, you will be hired as VP Analytics for 4 months and not as CDO. And then if the CIO is happy, and then he will give you the CDO position. Why? Why don't you interview me for the CDO role? So I had to like directly ask them. So for women, I think it's very, very important that you, or even men, like important to understand what you want at that point in your career, and also understand your market value, how good you are. If you're good, don't simply go and report to an executive director just because they want you to. Say no. And a lot of times they come back. So don't worry about not getting the role, and sometimes they don't deserve you. If that's a company you should be, I don't think you should be there.
It's a really good point. That's an excellent point, because even if you do succeed in getting that role, is that really the kind of environment that you want to be in? And is it going to be one that you can really thrive in? Wonderful advice, and definitely takes a lot of confidence and clarity in what you want and why you deserve it. Thank you. What else? What other advice do the rest of you have?
So I've just spent most of this week teaching our Confident Speaking for Women program, and this topic has come up a lot. And there was one particular example that really stands out, and it was somebody who wanted a promotion to the next level, and yet she knew that she wasn't really standing out. And when we really dug down, she was the one making the tea in the meetings. And my first, stop making the tea, stop taking on those roles. You have to start acting up as if you've already got that next position. Look to see what people at that level are doing and reflect that behavior. Don't be afraid to interrupt people in meetings. Make sure your voice is heard. And so it was all about how to speak more clearly and more confidently, but also being courageous enough to take that step up even before you've got the job.
Excellent example. And what you're underscoring, Sarah, is communication isn't just conveyed through your words, it's conveyed through your actions and the choices that you make. Kieran, anything to add?
Actually, it's quite a similar one, and it was actually advice Sarah gave me about not taking notes. So I was an avid note taker, and Sarah challenged me at the end and went, will you ever look at those notes again? And I was like, no. And she's like, why are you taking them? You're making yourself look around the room and look at the decision makers. They don't take notes. And I actually bought myself a diary with only that amount of space to write notes, to stop myself having space to write lots of notes. I write very small now, but it really noticeably made a difference to my confidence, as well as to what I was, the projection of what I was doing. So yeah, it was a follow on from not making the tea. It was the very much of your note taking.
And gosh, and what seems so
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
I was just thinking you're probably much more focused as well, because your head's up and you're able to look people in the eyes and confidently take part in the conversation. So glad I made a difference, Karen. Thank you.
No, you do. And I did remember. I remember saying,
Well
but I
done.
won't remember anything. And you went, you'll remember. And I do. And you remember what you need to remember.
Mm.
And it's noticeable difference.
Laura Sanchez said something I was just thinking. She said, I love that advice. Something so simple, but with such an impact, right? It seems pretty minor. However, it can make such a difference in how you project, and to your point, Sarah, be in the moment. Eleanor, I'd love to hear from you. I know you did an entire session at a Women in Tech conference, I think, on salary negotiation and other tips. So what advice do you have to share?
Yeah, so I'm big into sort of all the stats all around the biases of getting women into tech, landing those roles and how you negotiate well for them. I think one that's quite interesting is that, and I've really experienced this myself, if I'm looking at a job ad and it's not transparent about the salary, there's no indication of pay, I immediately feel like, oh, I shouldn't apply for that job, because something about it just really turns me off to the role. And women are 10% more likely to walk away from a job and not even apply if it's not clear about salary. And there's a ton of depth to what goes behind this, but it basically relates to the idea that women take less risks when it comes to job ads, when it comes to the job application process, largely because we have less available time than men, just because of biases and family circumstances and all the other expectations on women. But there are things we can do to help with that. So even if we're looking at job ads and going, oh, I feel a little bit like I shouldn't apply because it's not clear about salary, knowing that you face this bias, what I've started doing is reaching out to the hiring managers, reaching out to those companies and asking directly, can you give me an indication of what the salary is? Because I can't waste my time applying unless you can give me an indication whether I can afford to take the role when I'm successful. And I do say when and not if in these emails. And a lot of times companies might respond and say, we're not willing to share that information at this point. I've started politely replying back and going, that's perfectly fine if that's your policy, but you might find that you're disadvantaging women. If you find that your teams aren't as diverse as you would like, you might want to reconsider this policy, but thanks for your time, have a nice day. And the last time I did this, I actually then got an email back from the team this role was specifically in, who had been forwarded this fairly polite email, and they got back to me with a salary range. So even just kind of opening people's eyes to these biases that they might not know that they're introducing can really help us, get through some of those initial hurdles and into that job pipeline. And then there's a whole other story of when it comes to actually negotiating, because women negotiate 15 to 50% less when accepting a job offer. It's like an alarming range, right? We just, for some reason, are conditioned not to argue back, not to ask for more. And the thing I've found most helpful for this personally, and with some of the women who I've managed through my career as well, when they've gone on to new roles, is tell myself I have to negotiate. It doesn't matter if I might not take this job. It doesn't matter if I think it's a fair offer. Negotiate anyway, because you just should. It's what everyone else is doing. So I force myself to negotiate. And also, if I feel like I'm being lowballed, like you were saying, Nima, it absolutely happens all the time. Women are getting lowballed in the industry constantly. I try and focus on evidence and focus on reasons. So rather than just saying, I think I'm worth more, I say, I do have several years of senior experience, like we talked about. I have this, that, and the other. What specific skill would you need me to provide evidence for to pay me what I'm asking? Is this beyond your salary range? What reasons are you giving for the salary you're offering me? I guess just the final point is I refuse to give people my current salary. This can vary country to country on whether that's acceptable or not, but if at all possible, it's nobody's business what you currently earn. because
Mhm.
they should value
Mhm.
you for
Mhm.
the experience you currently have, not for how you were valued 3 years ago when you took your last job. And they should value you at the rate they expect to value all of their engineers, not you as an individual and whatever biases they might take when they look at you. So I just try and make sure everything's really evidence-based all the way through, and it helps me push back against some of these challenges.
I am so grateful we are recording this session. You just packed in such exceptional, actionable advice. And I mean, there was so much there, Eleanor, and I don't know if you all recall in the audience, I introduced Eleanor as an outspoken advocate for inclusivity and equity in teams. And my goodness, you've demonstrated that so beautifully. So having that courage, if the data is not there, ask for it. You have every right to ask for it. And I love how you highlight if there's a reluctance to do so, you educate them a little bit on the impact that's having about in terms of recruiting a diverse slate of candidates and simple language choices. When, not if, I get this position. We can go on and on. Thank you. That was really, really helpful. I also want to point out the fact that many of these stats that Eleanor has cited, she's shared links with us, which Andrew has dropped in chat. So if you want to dig into some of this more, I encourage you to check those out. And also I just want to share a super quick story that underscores one of the points you made, Eleanor, in terms of women. I don't remember the exact number, but women are much less likely to negotiate. First of all, as a hiring manager myself, who has hired countless people throughout my career, it's a concern to me if the candidate doesn't negotiate. Because what is that saying about their ability to influence and negotiate once they get the position for all sorts of things, to get their idea to influence a client, whatever the case might be. So think about it too from that perspective. All righty. So someone asked a very important question, and we promised to not only talk about tips for actually securing a job, but once you do, how do you ensure that you're really successful and advance? So transitioning to that, Sarah, you pointed out the fact that you've been doing a lot of teaching of our Confident Speaking for Women program. Could you share some of the top tips from that program that can help in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the questions that come up are exactly to this point. How can I get myself noticed? And the people who are asking it are often not contributing in areas that they don't feel they have a strength. And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Women underestimate their strengths. They underestimate what they can do. And so if you've been invited to a meeting, you are perfectly entitled to join in with that meeting and not hold back. And I know early on in my career, and I often share this story, I was identified as a high potential and put on one of those awful assessment programs. We were given 15 minutes to discuss a problem. And apparently I didn't speak for 11 minutes. So I didn't have very long to make an impact. And that was really important learning for me, because I realized if I wasn't speaking early on, even if those conversations were going on in my head, if no one could hear my contribution, I wasn't going to get noticed and I wasn't going to get promoted. So yeah, get noticed, make sure you join in the conversation. It doesn't matter that you're the most junior person in the room. You have been invited there for a reason, so you still have something to contribute. So to join in would be my biggest advice.
Excellent. And we talk about the concept of on-ramps. Can you give a few examples if that's challenging for some women to kind of insert themselves into the conversation, some tactics for doing that?
Yeah, I think particularly people who identify as introverts, they find these meetings very challenging. How, especially when we're working virtually, how do you get in on those conversations? And obviously in a physical world, we can actually use our hands. You can sort of physically move forward and start the conversation. But you see people going off mute, on mute, off mute, on mute, and you know they want to say something. And often just finding those expressions which is, as Carrie said, are on-ramps, things that you can say to get you in on the conversation. So I agree with Carrie, and I'd like to add, or I disagree with Eleanor, and here's why. I've got something I'd like to say now. When you finished, I would like to add something to the conversation. So you can interrupt. And if everybody is interrupting in the meeting, it's perfectly acceptable for you to do the same. Don't hold back and wait, because nobody's going to come up and tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, Sarah, have you got something you'd like to add? Although you did very nicely, Carrie. Thank you.
Well, I actually was going to say, Sarah, a lot of us won't actually do that, but that's another thing we can be mindful of to support one another. Nima, I haven't heard from you lately. What would you like to share? Help be advocates of one another. Nima, that was more an example, but do you have something you'd like to share?
So I think for any challenge, I think it's as peers or women, we should support each other. We have all these forums where we come together and talk, like today. And what I've seen over the years is my experience, we don't keep in touch as women. And that same thing happens even in the organizations. There's women in tech forums, the girls somewhere joining together, but it doesn't really expand. The blast radius of women supporting women is very small. And I think that is where we should make a difference. And whatever that could be, and sometimes it could be your own passion. Like I have a passion to promote single mothers. Right. So that's a niche area. So whatever your area is, or women in tech, or, little girls or school children, I think it should start from there. Like when you start young, it continues all this. These are all behavioral patterns that you teach. And I think we can't teach them when they are like 50 or 60. I mean, nothing against that age group, but it's difficult to learn. So I think teaching and learning young is very important in that aspect. Yeah.
Completely agree. I want to acknowledge an audience member, Victoria Reeves. This is an incredible discussion, and I would love to receive the recorded copy for future reference. I coach global and gifted women in STEM on communication and writing skills. Victoria, we have this available on a podcast after this event. So Andrew, I know you've dropped the link, but if you could add it back in, and we'll share it also at the end of this session. Karen, I'd love to hear from you. You have been recognized for being a leading executive in the technology field. I have no doubt that you have experienced your share of challenges, probably painful lessons learned, and lots of advice. What stories and examples would you like to share?
I think one of the things that's been key to me, and I think is key to everyone, is like find your tribe and use them. When we were saying earlier about should I go for this job, forward that to your group and say, shall I, shan't I? Because sometimes you need those cheerleaders, and also you're that cheerleader for your group of women around you to say, no, you can do that, and let's go for it, and support them. And it is that, exactly as Nima just said, it's that network, and we need to work together. For me also, I practice a lot. If I've got a big meeting, and I'll be honest, before I do any presentation, I sit there, I breathe, I practice. When I've had an interview, I'll practice on the way to there. I may look slightly strange with headphones on and talking to myself, but I think it is that practice. And even if it's before a big meeting and you know what you want to say, practice saying it, or practice it to some of your friends or your wider tribe to say, does this sound right? And get them to go, or practice interrupting, practice going, things like that. Another tip, actually, another Sarah tip, stand up. When you get that opportunity, so I'm quite short, so there isn't a nice equality about Zoom, but a lot of the time I am the only woman in the room. And if I get that opportunity now to stand up and there's something on a screen, I'll stand up, but then I'll stay stood up, and then the whole room has to look at you. And again, that gives you that authority over that room. And it does, personally, it really helps me. Also, one of the things that I do is I lower my voice. If I need to command the room, I will lower my voice and I will go very slowly. I did it far too long last week at one meeting. I hurt my vocal cords, but it really does keep people focused, because there's lots of research about tones of voice and what people will hear, but it really, really helps. Also, there's phrases that I've learned, like we've all had it. If there was a woman in this virtual room that has not said something, and 30 seconds later someone says the same and everyone goes, yes, that's great. Phrases like, thank you for building upon my idea. It's really helpful. And little bits, just these, it's not being rude, and it's just saying that. And like, sometimes I joke and say, sometimes I just need to take the testosterone out of the room. Now, I'm at a level now where I can actually say that out loud sometimes. Not everyone can. And I realise I'm in that privileged position. But sometimes I will say, can we all breathe and get the ego gone? And then bring people back in. But that actually comes with the privilege and the confidence of my position. So I know that is more difficult for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've found is every time I've changed role, especially, Julie Gillard, who was the first Australian PM, and I was reading some stuff about her, and I really like how she dealt with what she had to deal with. But she said, call out bad behaviours from the beginning. And I've started to do that, because the minute you let a bad behaviour happen again, then it's just accepted. Mm-hmm. So I'm a step parent, and I get really offended when people say things like the ugly stepchild or all stuff like that when they're talking about a rogue project. And before in my career, I've just let it go. And someone said it the other day to me, and I went, sorry, can we stop this? I personally find that really offensive. And they all went, oh, sorry, Karen, never been said again. But if I'd have allowed that to go on, I would have got more angst about it. And then everyone, when I did say it, would say, well, I've been saying it for months. Why is she now moaning? So it is very much about calling that out. And I think it's about learning phrases. So saying things like, I don't appreciate it. Do you realise how that may have come across? Mm-hmm. And again, if in doubt, practice with someone, those all. And then look, the other main advice is recruit women, recruit diversity. If you are in a position where you can recruit, go back to your recruitment people and say, I'm not looking at these CVs until I've got a 50-50 mix. Give me that. And then be an ally to the women that you work with them, make sure that you're giving those opportunities. Some of us who have been in technology far too long sit there, and I know how hard it was at the beginning and the opportunities I wasn't given. Well, I can give those opportunities to my staff coming through. I can make sure that I go out to lunch with all my younger, like early career people, because do you know what? I can help them, and then that gets them used to mixing with people at different levels. Have people come and shadow you in a meeting. Give them the opportunity, because I think unless we all help, and it comes back to the tribe, if we don't help each other, then nothing will move forward. So if we all hold hands, we're a formidable force. And for me, I think that would be like my main advice. Find some people and just help other people, because I promise you, they will help you when you need it as well.
Oh, my word. Here's another example of how I'm so grateful this is recorded. Excellent, excellent advice. And some of those things, again, Karen, really simple. Doesn't take a lot of moxie to do. When you have a really important point, stand up. change the dynamic by lowering your voice, slowing your rate of speech. And I love the point you made about having the courage to call something out at the moment it happens, because otherwise, and you could do that in a very respectful way, because in some cases, like the STEP project example, that individual wasn't even aware that that potentially could be hurtful, right? So having the courage to respectfully call it out, otherwise it's going to fester and it's going to manifest in ways that aren't as productive, right? And then it becomes super awkward to call it out if you've let it go on for so much time. So thank you. And Diana Howell says it's also important for women during in-person meetings to take a seat at the table, not a chair along the wall. Not only sit at the main table, but have the courage to stand when you want to really underscore something. Richard Blunt, I'm learning so much today that I never expected to hear. Thank you all very much. And we've talked a lot about the role that men can play to reduce this disparity gap. So all of this advice can be equally applicable and helpful to them. So let's get into some biases that women are up against, especially within STEM, starting with age bias. Nima, do you have any? And by the way, this can come at both ends of the spectrum. Young women can face age bias and older women can face age bias. And you shared during our prep, Nima, a story with me about a bias you experienced when you were much younger getting into the profession. Would you share that?
Definitely. Yeah. Typically, the discrimination for age is spoken for older generation, right? And it's always like, okay, the baby boomers are facing discrimination. But I think there's a lot of discrimination even when you start young or like at the younger ages. And that's kind of ignored because there's no one to complain to. At least in the older generation, there's like somebody taking note of it because some of their friends are in the top positions. Let's say when I was transitioning from, let's say, mid management to senior management, I was giving some interviews, and every time I would go to the interview, I would hear this like, oh, you're too young for the job. No one said that, oh, you don't know this or you don't know that, but they were always like, oh, you're too young. Do you think you should wait for a few years? Do you really feel prepared for this role? And I could never understand why. And then, like, yes, I have a short hair and probably look 1 or 2 years younger than I am, but I'm not really that young, right? So obviously you can't talk about your date of birth during your interview. So the next thing I did was I actually tried this as an experiment, and it really worked. So I bought this really thick rimmed glasses and wore it for my next interview. No issues about age at all after that. And so I have an interview glass that I use, and then there's this regular glass. So am I supposed to be doing that? At some point, I'm like really thinking, should I be actually doing this? And then I realized there's a lot of discrimination when you're young. Mm-hmm. And I was given the offer, whether I took it or not is a different story, but I was given an offer with a thick rim glass. So there is discrimination, but that is not real. That's ignored, And so somewhere, I think as women or as people, as human beings, we should help each other and get over that bias. No one is questioning Mark Zuckerberg why he was a CEO at 23, for example. But everyone questioned New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda for going out for a party because she was young.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So why is that so different? The yardstick need to change. Yeah.
Absolutely. Eleanor, I know you have some statistics and insights.
Yes, always got a statistic. So this is actually an area I've only been looking into more recently, is like that intersectionality between age and gendered bias. And I found a really interesting article that basically says there's no right time to be a woman because you're either too young or you're too old. And there's this like the article mentions there's a nanosecond of time in a woman's career where she's might not be subject to so much ageism. But you're right, it's absolutely like quite a prevalent bias that women face. And stats vary but we're at least 5% more likely across the board to experience ageism than men. And in different age categories, like I think I read a statistic that from 59 to 65-year-old women, 88% of them felt like they had experienced age-related bias. And that was significantly more than the male average for those ages, right? All of these, the predominant feeling, the experience of that ageism tends to be, I feel like my opinions are ignored. So when it comes to countering the bias, I think the most important thing we can do is, and again, this applies once we're in roles a little bit more than in the interview stages, like you say, Nima, sometimes we just got to do what we got to do to get the job, right? Once we're in a role, feeling like my opinion's being ignored, the main thing I've been able to do is kind of walk people through my thinking. And I found that if someone says something that I really disagree with, and I say, I think you're wrong, we should do this instead, they just dismiss it. Whereas if I go, I've got questions about why we would do it your way. Can you walk me through it? What I heard you say is this. And they go, yes, that's what we should do. And I say, okay, well, but doesn't that introduce this problem? Does this problem outweigh the benefits you're talking about? And I can kind of slowly walk them to the point where they go, oh, it might not be the best idea, actually. And I've had a lot of success with doing that. It's annoying and it's unfortunate that I have to kind of slow everything down. And in some ways it's felt, especially when I was more junior in my career, it felt like I was almost lessening myself by doing that. I make myself seem more ignorant than I am by having to ask these questions. But it did get people to engage with me enough that they would listen to my opinion. Now that I'm in more of a senior position, then what I tend to do is focus on establishing common ground. So if there's a disagreement amongst multiple people, including me, I say, well, it sounds like we all agree that this is a problem that needs to be solved, right? And by kind of reframing the discussion and saying, what can we agree on? It kind of helps us step through that process again of what are the important facets? Okay, here's where we disagree. Let's focus on that. So it's about using the skills that I think women on average do have more of around those communications and those relationship building skills, leaning into the things we have strengths at to manage those conversations and get people to take the time to really listen to what we have to say.
Excellent point, Eleanor. The paraphrasing, just the things that you can do with your communication skills, of which women have stronger, to positively influence the outcome. And we've got all sorts of wonderful comments and resources in chat. So be sure to grab some of those if you haven't already. We are nearing the end of our conversation. So I would love to close with each of you offering some parting advice. Let's lead with you, Eleanor.
I think for me, the most important thing is to be aware of the biases you face and be willing to point them out to others, because the more people know about these biases, the more chance we have of affecting them. So I'm a really big advocate of know what you face and tell others about it when you can.
Excellent. Nima?
I would say know your worth. When you know your worth and where your attitude, I think world is your oyster.
Excellent. Something I talk a lot about is the critical importance of really fine-tuning and being clear on your personal brand, which is key to really, really having confidence in your worth. How about you, Sarah?
Well, building on that personal brand, I think find out how you are perceived. And if you don't like the way you're perceived, do something about it. And I'm going to share in chat, it's not a link, but it's a talk given by Carla Harris. And she just talks to that point exactly and shows how she turned around, how she was perceived so she could get her next promotion. So
excellent. Want to close us out, Karen?
For me, it would be bold and brave. And at those moments, just ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And just go for it.
Be bold and be brave. Just go for it. I've had a lot of questions about how we can get this recording. So Andrew will drop the link in chat. Oh, there you go. Andrew's on it. So please grab these links so you can get access to this. We also always follow up these episodes with a blog that will have even more information that expands on these excellent points. Thank you, Nima, Eleanor, Sarah, Karen. This has just been invaluable, and we just scratched the surface. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your active engagement, audience. And we'll close out by giving a preview of next month's Power Speaking Live event. In which we'll be discussing how you can use your voice to make a difference, both in the workplace and in the community. Thank you again, everyone.